Thanks for joining us. My name is Michele DeBerry, and I am a program specialist for the State Department of Education in the Special Services Office or Special Education Office. I am actually a speech pathologist and a school psychometrist, but I answer most of our questions that come to us on evaluation and eligibility, related services questions, and questions about dyslexia. And I'll give you my email later on in the presentation. I'm really excited to have Dr. Sara Rich and Dr. Erika Olinger with us today. They've developed our PowerPoint and are going to answer some of your questions regarding our delivery models and methods during this unprecedented time in our lives. So I'm going to give the floor over to them. In the meantime, if you would just continue to put your name, your school district, and your position over in the chat box. We won't be able to hear anybody else. You'll have to communicate with us through the chat box. And like I said earlier, the session will be recorded and we'll get all of the resources out to you later this evening or early tomorrow morning as soon as we have all those gathered and available. So at this time, I'm going to give it over to, I don't know who's starting first, Erika or Sara.
Hi, this is Sara Rich. For those of you who don't know me, I am a school psychologist and also a licensed psychologist. I've got experience working in Oklahoma schools, and currently I am working with OSU Center for Health Sciences, so the medical school. I'm also past president of OSPA and really here kind of on behalf of OSPA and our members, and I'm so excited to see so many school psychologists on this. It's kind of a terrible situation that we're in, but it's nice that we're all connected and that we're all getting this opportunity. Before we get started on frequently asked questions, I'll let Erika introduce herself as well.
Okay, thanks, Sara. And I am Erika Olinger. So happy to see all of you today. I am also a nationally certified school psychologist. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I've worked in several Oklahoma school districts as a school psych practitioner and as the assistant director of special services for Putnam City, so an administrator role as well. And I'm currently the crisis team, one of two crisis team school psychologists at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. I am on the OSPA board, and I'm also the current NASP delegate, so I can answer questions as well from those two organizations. Just very happy to have you and hope that we provide some good resource and at least a virtual community for discussion and dialogue today.
All right, so meeting agenda, some of you may have, if you're connected with our OSPA, saw the video that we put out of frequently asked questions, but we know that it didn't get necessarily distributed to the wider audience, and we all have a lot of videos to watch right now. So as things were coming up with the State Department and these guidance meetings, we thought it would be important to just put those out there. So we're going to go through some frequently asked questions that you guys might be experiencing. And as Michele said, we want to make sure that we also address any questions that are not in our presentation, but hopefully a lot of your questions will just naturally be answered with the information we give. And then there are a lot of COVID-19 resources out there in general, but there's quite a few specifically for school psychologists and school psychometrists. And so we wanted to make sure you guys knew where to find those, because if you're like me, it's overwhelming to navigate everything that's out there right now. And so we wanted to make sure you knew that there were school psychology specific ones. And then of course, we want to make sure that your questions are addressed. We're really excited. We've got Michele to help us answer those questions. Todd's on the line too, so we might put him on the hot seat. But we want to make sure that these questions get answered. So hopefully you all know this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but just of where our education system is right now, not a lot has changed since the 26th board meeting. So starting Monday, all the schools should be in a distance learning plan, and beginning, they're expected to provide those distance learning for the rest of the school year. What the rest of the school years looks like and when that is, it sounds like it's dependent on the school districts, but the board advised sometime between May 8th to May 15th would be a good time to end the school year for that. So the distance learning really is going to occur over the next 4 to 5 weeks. As you guys probably know, as you're working with your districts, that's going to look very different from district to district. So what your role as a school psychologist or a school psychometrist or a special education director is going to look very different depending on your district and the resources of your families. And as you have seen, there are tons of guidance documents coming out, which are really, really helpful from the State Department. And if you're looking for answers, I would really advise that that's the first place you go. And we're going to point you to some of those towards the end here. So let's dive into some questions. First one, timelines. So let's go through our timeline questions, because I know those are probably, we're all driven by timelines, and those are probably sitting there causing you the most anxiety. So after April 6th, when our schools officially were back in school days, does that mean that my 45-day timeline for those initial assessments that I got consent on before the school closure, are they reactivated? Yes. So as of right now, the federal timelines have not changed, and our state does not have the power to waive those because those are federal timelines. So as soon as school starts back with this distance learning plan, then the clock starts for all IDEA compliance timelines. So this period that we're in right now that ends today, March 23rd to April 3rd, that's kind of was an extended spring break. So those were not school days. But as soon as the distance learning plan starts back, then that does mean your timeline clock starts back. However, this does not mean that you have to do in-person assessments, and we really do not, you should not do in-person assessments during this time because safety is really our primary concern right now. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how to get assessments done or what to do if maybe you can't get assessments done, but just know officially your timeline does start back up right now as of today, April 3rd. That's what we know. Let's talk more about reevaluation timelines. So as we know, reevaluation timelines are based off of calendar. So do reevaluation timelines still apply for those due during either the school closure or the distance learning plan? Yes. So again, at this time, the reevaluation due dates will not change based on this current situation. So if you have a reeval that's due April 8th, that's still due April 8th. But again, that does not mean that you're supposed to conduct live in-person assessments during this time. So school teams, what we're really recommending, and should always be your process, is that you will review that review of existing data or the REDs to determine if you even need additional assessments. Because remember, not every school, not every child that's due for a reevaluation actually needs the more evaluations completed. So if you can do a reevaluations without additional data, then you might be able to just complete this process through a virtual meeting and completing the REDs and the MEGs. But if you do need data, then your team's going to have to figure out the best process for either one, collecting that data, or being able to document that we can't collect all the data right now. So we recommend opening up a new reevaluation when we can physically meet and do that. Okay, so I really encourage you and your teams to make that decision based on the student's need, not based on the current situation. So it's not individualized. If all of your students who have reevals, you just continue on without data, because some of those students may need data. So we don't want to just continue on and not make a plan for collecting that data later. Okay. And then the last timeline specific one is about those sooner start kids. Do they still need to have eligibility determination on or before their 3rd birthday? Yes, because again, these federal timelines are not waived. So children receiving sooner start services under Part C must be considered for eligibility services on or before their 3rd birthday for Part B. This does not mean that you're supposed to conduct live in-person assessments. The school-based team should work with the Sooner Start team to make those decisions based on available existing data. And again, might need to decide once we can do in-person assessments, we'll get that done. Okay. All right, so talking more about actually conducting assessments. And I think this is where a lot of us are questioning, what does this mean for us? So the idea of, can we conduct assessments during this time? It depends. There's not a clear cut yes or no, but it's really a let's think about it. So any assessments that are going to require face-to-face administration should not be conducted, because again, our primary concern is the safe and health of ourselves, our children, the families we're working with, and right now being face-to-face with people is not safe. However, there are other assessments that just, you would have done them virtually anyways. Like if you were going to send home a Basque or a Vineland or some of these things, and if that's all you need to do to complete that assessment, then that might be okay. Okay, so those are a little more clear cut. Like if I need to be face-to-face, I'm not going to do it. If it's already has a virtual component, then I can probably do that. However, you're probably getting a lot of things in your inbox right now from Pearson and Presence Learning and all these places saying, look, you can still do your WJ through distance, or you can still do a WISC through distance. So we really have to consider, what does that mean? And Erika, feel free to pop in on any of this. I know we talked quite a bit about it, but you really need to consider your competence in doing a distance assessment. Have you received the training to do that? Has that assessment that you're trying to do, has it been standardized in this? And also, what's the best interest of your students? So really, again, we're in a 4 to 6 week period of school. Is it really best interest of them right now to try to sit them down in front of a computer and complete a standardized assessment? And are you in a space where you're feeling calm enough and less stressed that you can do that effectively and competently? Also, are you trying to do it through some sort of designated platform? Like I said, all these publishing companies are saying, we have this out here. If you were holding a WJ up to a like FaceTime or to a Zoom, that's not a designated platform. So, and I doubt very many of us have the financial resources already committed to some of those online designated platforms that are out there. You also have to think about how much support that individual is going to need. I did see an email from Pearson the other day that said a parent could facilitate the WISC, and that concerns me. That really concerns me. And again, what's the purpose? Why would we be doing that right now? There's confidentiality issues, and then the validity. And you have to think about any of those assessments that you would do right now, how valid are they going to be to the next school year and actually making treatment decisions about that student and intervention decisions. I would guess that none of us are in a typical state right now. And when you're doing assessments in an atypical state, it's going to be hard to apply them when we're back into that. Erika, do you want to add to this?
Thanks, Sarah. I just also wanted to say, thinking about not just your own reactions and anxiety and training, but thinking about your students are likely not in a place where their responses or answers of the types of things that they're going to produce on an assessment is a valid measure at this time of their functioning, because as we all know, we're still dealing with initial responses to crisis. And so their anxiety or other coping mechanisms, it's likely that they're not going to be providing valid responses, even if we could. So as Sarah said, I would just like to reemphasize that you're going to be getting information from testing companies saying that you can provide services or assessments through virtual means, but I don't know that just because we can means that we should. And so I think just, going through an ethical decision-making model, again, about your competence and truly holding the best interests of the students would be paramount at this time. And also just thinking about, because our landscape is uncertain, and I know that students could benefit from services, but we would be making them, quite frankly, eligible for services that we haven't completely landscaped yet. And so eligibility in itself, I don't know, is going to fix any issues until our landscape is a little bit more certain in terms of what that will look like in the future.
Yes, thank you, Erika. And a lot of this information, especially related to that, we have pulled from NAS guidance on virtual service delivery. And I would really encourage you to go and read their information on it, as well as a webinar that they've posted on this, because it really helps you clarify and think for yourself and ethically and professionally what you should be doing. Michele, did you have something else?
Yes, Sharon just asked a question. Would you say that the same thought applies to online or paper assessments such as the Basque or Vineland, particularly if we have to wait to do the remainder of the assessment, the face-to-face part, at a much later date?
Yes, absolutely. That's an excellent question. I would really, and I think maybe I have this on here a little bit down the road, if you just needed to wrap up an assessment, then maybe doing some of those rating forms is okay, but I wouldn't open a new assessment or start, and because those Basque and Vineland and all of those are going to look much different now than they would when we're back in our typical setting. So again, really considering, I can't tell you not to do it, but I would really strongly consider why you're doing it and what that you're going to do with that information.
And I'll also just add in too that, of course, when you're meeting with your teams and you're discussing on your reviews of existing data and the needs of students, a lot of times a comprehensive evaluation is also going to include things like direct observations of students in an environment, which is clearly not something we can do right now. You know, even following around with a FaceTime at home is not really a direct observation of a student's academic climate. And so just recognizing that typically an evaluation is going to include more than just assessments anyway, and having those discussions with your teams about you might be missing those important components that you wouldn't be getting through a standardized assessment anyway.
Yes, absolutely. And so kind of going on to that, but you guys are all probably thinking, and you're like, but I've got 15 open assessments right now. What do I do with those? So you do procedurally need to close those out, again, because we're still under timelines, but that doesn't necessarily mean conducting new assessments. So there are several options that I personally have thought of based off the literature that I've seen out there. But again, if Erika or Michele or someone else adds to this, that would be great as well. So if you do have sufficient data that's already been completed or collected to complete the MEAGS, then I would recommend going ahead and completing that MEAGS and closing it out. Because that's just one more thing off your plate. You don't need more data. The data was already collected kind of in a situation that you feel comfortable with it. If sufficient data has not been collected, then the team will need to determine, is there just like maybe one form that we haven't gotten back and we can get that back virtually and then complete it? Or do we need to procedurally close out this evaluation and document our plan for reopening the evaluation once face-to-face assessments can be completed? So in that case, the team would hold that decision. They would still hold the meeting and document everything by the due date, but there would be clear plans and documentation within the written notice as far as when we're going to reopen and what needs to be done with that.
So Sheila Glover had a question. Will Sooner Start, we're going to address Sooner Start concerns here in a minute, but no, the school, once the student turns 3, because of changing from Part C to Part B, the school would take responsibility for services to the 3-year-old child. And then Jared asked about, could the evaluation be marked that the parent failed to produce the child? And that answer is no. We need to document that this is a special circumstance. This is, you know, an extraordinary circumstance in our society today. But no, the parent didn't necessarily fail. It's not the parent's fault or the child's fault or necessarily the school's fault that we're not able to complete the evaluation right now. We just need to document that. And make sure we're communicating with parents that they understand that we're coming up with a plan to complete the evaluation. We'll talk some more about that, or Sara Sara and Erika will talk some more about that here in just a minute.
Yeah, so, and I think that's procedurally, it might look like what we would do if the parent failed to produce the child, but yeah, we don't want to mark that because that's not accurate, that's not what happened. And
Sara,
then,
can you expand on what you meant by closing out the evaluation?
yeah, so my understanding, and again, Michele or Todd or Krista, if you have other guidance on this, please let us know, is that you would go ahead, if it's I'm talking about open assessments that you've already gotten consent on. So if you have an open assessment that you've already gotten consent on, then you still need to do the MEAGS paperwork, but that MEAGS paperwork, you might not be able to make a decision about eligibility because you don't have the data. And so you're going to document probably not eligible or continuing eligibility, depending if it's an initial or reeval. And officially everyone signs that MEAGS, but then your written notice and your MEAGS is going to document that we're going to open this back up in the fall. Does that sound right, Michele? Okay. Okay, so again, if you have a consent open, you have to have a MEAGS to close that consent. It's kind of the paperwork piece there. If a child's due for a reeval and you haven't opened the consent yet, then on the reds, you would mark there's additional data needed, but you wouldn't open consent right now. You're going to say, we're going to collect that data on the reds. On the reds, you're going to mark, we're going to collect that data when school is physically open. Okay, so two different situations there. One, consent's already open, and one, we haven't opened consent yet, so we can just document it with the reds, our plan. Okay. Let's see some of these
Hang
other
on a
questions.
second.
Go ahead, Todd.
Sorry, I missed some of that. I was getting some chocolate pudding. Yeah, so if you have consent currently, you move forward. I don't know if we should really suggest that if you need additional data, you should let people know that, and then you should obtain parent consent if you can.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that if you get a parent, if you do a REDS, you need more data, you should just move forward like you always would, get parent consent.
Okay.
Because we don't want to be in situations where parents are saying, hey, my school never attempted to get consent from me. Yet you might be off on the timeline, that's fine. It would be an extenuating circumstance. But I would not, if you do know you need additional data, get parent consent if you're able to do that, and then move forward and do the evaluations that you can do. And if you cannot, don't. Is that not as confusing?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. So you would still, just to clarify then, we do the reds, we say we need more data, so we're going to go ahead and open up, get consent to do an evaluation, but we'll document that we won't necessarily be completing that evaluation until schools open back up because of the need for face-to-face.
Right, you would just go over the timeline. And
Okay.
in this situation, it's an extenuating circumstance, and we can deal with it then.
Okay. And then there's this question that's popped up of this idea of leaving a MEAGS open. Todd, would you recommend we just leave a MEAGS quote unquote open and then send written notice saying that we're going to continue once schools are back up?
Yeah, but you'll want to be specific. So you'll want to say, we can't we can't make an eligibility determination because we need to do an assessment that we can only do in person. And so we're going to do that as soon as we can, and then go from there. Now, what we've been saying also is that doesn't mean that you can't provide anything to a child. You could still, based off data that you do have, suggest different interventions or accommodations that may be useful in a distance learning environment. And I think parents would more so appreciate that. Otherwise, if we say, oh, well, we're just going to stop, we'll let you know later. That, to me as a parent also, feel like, well, the school's just putting me off for till who knows when.
Right.
And yeah, so it's kind of a failure to produce the child, right? I mean, it's not really anybody's fault, but that's what happened. Like the child was for some reason not able to be produced for an in-person evaluation. The reason being COVID-19. So but we want to keep all those dates. We want to keep all that of that going because we know we can handle that on the back end. We don't want to do anything else because we don't want districts thinking, I'm just going to send out a statement saying, hey, we're not doing evaluations for now. So we want to steer very clear of that and just make sure we're documenting all of that. Yeah, that's what I would share.
Yeah, so it sounds like, Todd, if I'm understanding.
So we're not, somebody keeps chatting. So you're not closing the meetings. Okay, you're still in the period of evaluation and determining eligibility. Yes, it may take longer than 45 school days now, but there are extenuating circumstances that we will document. And I would use a written notice for all of this. Be liberal in your use of written notices.
So I think kind of ignore what I just said then and listen to Todd. Basically, what he's telling you guys is if you don't have, and Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you don't have the data to close it out, don't close it out. Just you're going to be overdue on your timeline and you're going to document why you were overdue on your timeline. But if we close it out, we might end up missing that student later on because they don't pop up in the system.
Exactly. I've also heard some districts suggest that they were going, they said, could we ask parents to revoke consent? Also, do not do that. Because again, reasonable people will understand why things are being delayed. They will understand that. As long as you have good parent communication, you're letting them know. You're being very specific about the fact that, hey, we can do these assessments. If you as a parent have time to do that also, if you're available, because there might be logistical issues on a parent's end. And, just be very clear about, we can't do this evaluation that we really need because it has to be in person, and explain that to them. And I think most people will be understanding about that. But then I'm also saying, because you do have some data, you can still provide suggestions to people, whether or not you can determine if they're eligible for special ed, just like we do for any kid that we eventually do evaluations on and then determine they are not eligible, but here are some educational needs that we know about now because we've done all this extensive evaluations.
Okay, so before we move, or let me see what I have the next thing, but before we move that kind of covers timelines and closing out evaluations. Are there any more questions on that before we move on to the next topics? I believe, yes, it would apply to reevaluations also. So if you have a reevaluation open or a reevaluation during this time period, basically we're just kind of depending on what you would need to do, but your timelines are going to be unofficial. Don't close it out until you're ready to close it out, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, people keep asking about the means. You're not closing it.
Right.
Don't finish the means. You're not ready to finish the means, so don't do it. You're using that written notice to document what additional things you'll need to complete the means.
So again, kind of ignore everything I said and listen to what Todd's saying right now as far as do what's best for that student. And if closing out if you don't have the information to close out that evaluation, don't close out that evaluation. And I don't think Todd's going to put you in IEP jail.
It's closed right now.
Yeah, it's full.
Yeah, we're trying to all use common sense around this, okay? We don't want to do anything we wouldn't normally do. We want to take a common sense approach to all of this because we're trying to make sure everybody's safe. and we don't want to rush evaluations that may end up not being good for the kid. Or like Sara was saying, we don't want to do a online evaluation if we don't really have the platform for it or the knowledge to be able to do it, that kind of thing.
I think Alyssa's question of I have some students who were due while school was closed, but we're able to close them out. That's fine. I think if you have all the data to close it out, close it out. But if you don't have the data, don't, is what we're hearing. And I think that applies also to Cindy's question there of if it, I don't know, do you go ahead and open consent for ones that you would be doing anyways? Like brand new initial consent.
A parent requests an initial evaluation, you should move forward like you normally would. Someone's asking about kids who exit in May. There's, you know, there's not a good answer for some of this. I mean, if you can't do it and they leave in May, then you won't be able to do that. This is just to remind everyone, a problem across the entire nation. So we're just kind of figuring this out, but you know, just use common sense about what you're doing. Make sure you're documenting everything and letting parents know what's going on.
So I'm going to kind of keep moving through some of these other ones. I do see a question, I think, to the panelists here of maybe that based off these discussions, if we can type up like a summary of official kind of the recommendations and send that out after the meeting, then I think that would be helpful because we've kind of had a little bit of back and forth, which is why I'm really glad we're doing this meeting, because I think everyone is kind of just working off of the information that we've received. So it helps to have us all together. I hope on this next question, does the IEP team conduct meetings in person if a parent's like, no, I have to meet in person? No, I hope you guys have all gotten that through all the messaging that's come out, that again, safety is key. So you're really needing to strive to meet virtually, and virtually doesn't mean it has to be like a Zoom or a teleconference, or a video conference. It can be a phone call, conference call with the team members, but also team members, just the same required membership and presence as you would for normally having an IEP team, and the members need to be there. And if it's, again, document. So if you're making lots of attempts and the parent can't be there, or for whatever reason, like if this is a really tricky situation and the you know you need an in-person meeting, then that needs to be documented clearly. FBAs, that's another thing that I know, and I've seen a few things come on there. So what if I started an FBA before the school closing? What do I do with that now? So kind of ignore this part. I would say if you have enough data to close out that FBA and you can get your functional hypothesis and make recommendations for a plan, then go ahead and have that meeting and go over all that data. But know that any plans you develop now based off data that was collected before school close may not be applicable to the current situation of where that child is right now in the home setting, or where they'll be next year. We all see that from year to year, that behaviors change quite a bit, and FBAs really are about collecting data within that context. So you might still have your hypothesis and close that out, but the behavior plan, you might want to be able to revisit that next year. If you weren't able to collect all that data, then it sounds like the best advice right now is to leave that open so that it can be completed when we're back in person. Erika, do you have anything else on that piece, on the behavior plan? No? Okay. teletherapy, parent training, other social emotional supports at a distance learning. This is what, I mean, there's a lot going on right now and we're all stressed, but as psychologists and psychometrists, I think this is time for us to shine, to say, hey, look, we can do more than do assessments. We also have these other skills. And so how can we support our students' needs and what our students' needs are right now? I'm going to guess that no student actually needs a WJCOG assessment right now. So what they might need is, parents might need some parenting strategies, kids might need some teletherapy. There's lots of different ways. So yes, you can provide this. There's guidance documents that just came out from OSD yesterday for related service providers, and I think they are incredibly applicable to the school psychologist and school psychometrist out there if you're thinking of doing any kind of distance interventions, teletherapy, any of that, because it really goes through the considerations as far as making sure FAPE and FERPA are in place, as well as HIPAA as well, which you don't necessarily have to have HIPAA, but that's the gold standard for confidentiality on those platforms you're using. But you're also going to need to think about the feasibility of those services and the needs of those services in the current situation. Erika, Michele, anything else you want to add to that piece of it? Okay. How do I document issues during the COVID-19 pandemic? Document. So I think Andrea Kunkel just sent something there that says it's fine to say that due to COVID-19, the examiner and the student could not meet in person to complete assessments, components that must be completed in person. So the evaluation or reevaluation will be completed when possible. So state exactly what's going on. Use the written notice, document it on the IEP, make sure parents have access to their rights and they have that. If you're not able to complete that evaluation, make sure that parents understand why and what the plan is for completing it, and document it in the written notice. Also making sure you're documenting all communication with parents is really, and all attempts of communication with parents. You should be doing that anyways, but it's especially important right now. What if a parent's not able to be contacted or declines those services? Michele, do you want to handle this one? Discussing that.
Well, again, again, we've talked about this is an extraordinary circumstance, and some parents really may have their hands full with either work or lack of internet or, multiple issues. And they may say, I don't want packets, I don't want services, I don't want anything. So what do you do in that case? The packets or services may not really apply to school psychologists or psychometrists, but just so you guys know, and you can make this applicable as you're speaking with families as well, that it's okay for parents to decline, but as we're communicating with them, we need to continue to communicate with them. And I don't remember if it was, Andrew, you might can answer, if it was the Tulsa or the Metro group. You guys this morning just talked about this, and some school districts are just coming up with a plan that someone is going to call that parent once a week and just making sure that they're still okay. Do they need anything, whether it's, schoolwork or, are they able to get to child nutrition and able to get, food and resources that time. We know parents are losing their jobs. There's just so many circumstances that a parent may say, I don't want it right now, but we need to continue to just offer them the supports that we have available. And again, just be sure and document those over the course of the next, however long this lasts.
Yes.
And you may communicate, I think we've already talked about this a little bit, communicate what kind of services are available, and that means everything from, child nutrition, that's not necessarily a service, but making sure that they know how to get to those resources, that they know that, services that are in the IEP will still be provided in some form or fashion. It's not going to look like it was at school. But just, you know, the important piece is that we're communicating with parents and we're making them feel included in the decisions made for their student.
Yeah, and I really think, I mean, this whole thing, it's unprecedented. It's the word of the month, or word of the year. And there's no guidelines of how to do this because we're all trying to figure it out. But if you're doing your due diligence, you're making sure everything's documented, you're making sure child's needs are met and that they're going to continue to be met when we get back, then that's what's most important. So just keep considering of, am I doing this because I feel like it's a legal process and I have to do it, or am I doing something that is actually going to make an impact on that child? And I think really focusing on the child and documenting what you're doing and making sure that they're not going to slip through the cracks because of this current situation.
Right. And I anticipate that, I mean, you may even have enough information. We may have enough information to go ahead and do a MEGS and an IEP meeting through some kind of virtual platform. But again, the parent may be overwhelmed and say, no, I don't want any services. I don't want my child on an IEP. I don't want anything. But in those situations, you know, if the child qualifies, that may be a situation that we need to look at again in the fall or whenever we're back, just to say, you know, hey, that was, you know, different. Now the kid's back in school and would really benefit from some additional supports. We still have this available. Your child is still eligible. Do you want to meet again?
Absolutely. All right, I'm gonna, for not just interest of time, but also because I think some of these questions are answered in some of the resources that are out there. So I want to make sure we have time to point you guys to those resources. And additionally, everything's being updated, as you know, by hourly, daily. So we want to make sure that you know where to get the most up-to-date information, because what we're saying right now may completely change if the federal government tells us something different next week.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I just want to start by saying that I just really appreciate the forum, and I've been in a lot of meetings this week, and so I don't know that I'm going to credit the source appropriately, but one place or one term that has stuck out in my mind is that we're all falling forward with grace. And so what that means is the purpose for these forums and the purpose to come together as a professional community is to have these exact discussions with each other. Because there's kind of two sides of the coin. There's a compliance side of the coin, which legally and ethically we're bound to do. And it's kind of one of the things that school psychs and school psychometrists hang our hats on. But the other side is the professional practice side, which is the part that speaks to, as long as what we're doing, what we feel is best for children and for families in this circumstance, and as long as we're documenting those best faith efforts, then as we get guidance, it's going to be okay. And one of the things I like to remind people is that as a crisis responder, typically I have the luxury of stepping in as an outside observer and helping to respond and to provide supports and to have the answers, if you will. And the strange thing about COVID-19 is none of us are outside of the circle. And so everybody's in the circle of the crisis, and we're all just working as best as we can to be supportive and find the answers. So with that being said, I appreciate, please keep the questions coming and the dialogue coming, but just know that it's not just that OSDE and Sara Rich and Erika Olinger may not have the answers, just that we're all forging forward, and that some of those answers may come exactly from your questions. So, and I just also want to thank, you know, again, Todd and Michele and all the folks at OSDE who are working tirelessly to help support our practice in cooperation with our organizations. So the next little bit, I'm just going to take you through some resources. I think one of the things Sara said at the very beginning was that it feels overwhelming. You're probably getting a million emails a day and everybody's putting out guidance and how-tos and documents. And so I think sort of for your own sanity and self-care right now, it would be important to notice not just your sources, but almost to limit your access to materials, and know that where the best information to guide your practice is going to come from, because I know I'm getting overwhelmed reading things from 100 of different places. So of course, one place that's going to guide our practice is the Oklahoma State Department of Education. So bookmark that as a homepage. If you're on social media, follow OSDE on your social media. A lot of the important meetings and discussions are now live on like a Facebook Live format. And so you can watch the discussions and watch as we're all participating in the forum. Of course, the Special Education Services webpage should be one that you look to. And the folks in special education are working as hard as they can to put out guidance from the federal government, from state guidance, and even from these discussions. And so these discussions with different special education groups from across the state are brought back into the department. They're being digested, and that's helpful in knowing not only what kind of guidance to put out, but in actually informing what the guidance looks like. So this is just a list here of what's currently already there to support districts. So again, these are all things that have been vetted by the State Department that they could change. So allow that grace, but know that these are the things Sarah's pointing to. These things are going to be helpful, and there is more coming out. And so they're still working, again, based on your feedback and feedback from the field on those types of things. But you'll see things there for the virtual IEP meeting checklist. There's behavior resources. There's a how-to for how to get those digital signatures. So a lot of those things that would be worth your time to watch and just check off the list and saying, okay, now I'm competent and I know what to do for those. Let me check my notes real quick. I think that was.
Let me address something to here. Okay.
Sure.
There's still a lot of questions about the timelines. So I just want to repeat again that we cannot remove these timelines. What we've been saying is that the reason people have brought up this idea about the parent of a child repeatedly fails or refuses to produce the child for an evaluation is that is one of the circumstances in which the timelines do not apply. Now, there's nothing specific to say that during COVID-19, all is forgiven, because there has literally never been this thing happen across the country. So, and I'm not sure if everyone kind of understands how we monitor, how we look for non-compliance, all of that. But if you participated in that, and this is why we keep hitting on documentation, is that there are extenuating circumstances. Yes, thank you, William. And that this is one of those situations. So whenever someone comes and says, oh, look, the school didn't do this in time, all of this, what we will be able to refer back to are the good faith efforts of the district to complete all of this. No one is going to we're not going to issue findings from a state complaint because you weren't able to have an in-person assessment that everyone agreed needed to happen. And so you couldn't make an eligibility decision. So sooner start evaluation, someone is asking about that. Nothing's being put on hold per se, okay? That's not the language. We're all moving through the process as best we can. And we are providing written notice to parents to say, hey, here's some evaluations we can't complete at this time. Here's some things we can do in the meantime. We're going to be able to complete the eligibility. We're going to be able to do make an eligibility determination when everyone's back in school and when we can complete these evaluations. So all of this, the timelines, parent engagement, this is all based on the fundamental piece of the IDEA that parents are part of this process, that schools are doing their best to actually evaluate children and do all of these things. So that's what we've got to look at when we're talking about all this. So yeah, we're going to miss some timelines. It's going to be okay. We're not going to issue from the State Department. We may have to issue to the feds in our annual performance report everything that was overdue and all this. That's fine, and they'll monitor us however they choose to do so. But obviously, we're not going to be looking at from March 13th to May 8th or May 15th how many evaluations timelines were missed, and then require corrective action on that because we know what happened. The only time that we might is if there was no documentation about this. The parent says they were never contacted. And when we look in the parent contact log, there's nothing indicating that the parent was contacted. All of those things we take into consideration, hearing officers take into consideration, all of that. So, and what we've been trying to say also is that we've got to be mindful of family situations, things that parents are dealing with. We said this on the related services webinar. If you have multiple children with disabilities all receiving related services, that is difficult for a parent to negotiate, especially if they are currently working at home. So we've got to be mindful of all of those things, but make a good faith effort to provide as much as we can, given the time we have. We've got 4 to 5 weeks, okay? We've got 4 to 5 weeks for most of the cases that we're talking about. That's really not very long. And so we just want to do the best within that time period. So I just wanted to share that because and Andrea is saying, yes, some national and state organizations have made specific recommendations for timelines. I'm part of the National Association of State Directors of Special Ed. We've asked for that kind of, those kinds of flexibilities on timelines and all of that, but we really won't know what will happen with those requests until, as Andrea is saying, no later than April 26th, but it might be April 26th. So in the meantime, we've just got to move forward as best we can. We've got to, like Sara was saying, look at the different evaluations that we're going to be doing. She provided some great information up front about how you should make those determinations and everything that you should consider. So just wanted to share that, but we shouldn't not do anything because we're worried about compliance. Those are fixable things. If you've been through a complaint or a monitoring investigation from us before, you know that we, no one goes to IP jail. We just say, here's some child-specific corrections that you need to make. And then we come back and we say, what were you doing? Well, we're going to have a lot of people that are over evaluation timelines anyway that already were. We already know that some evaluation timelines were missed before March 13th. It's not like it's nothing new that we go over timelines sometimes, and districts report those, and they report them in different ways, like the failure to produce or a child moving, that kind of thing. Well, we're just trying to do the best that we possibly can. And I would encourage you, like Sara was saying, also to look at those resources from the National Association of School Psychs and from the OSPA. They've got great resources out that you should look at. We've heard a lot of, on other calls from directors talking about their approaches to get all of this done. If you're in a district with, some of you are in districts with little, resources or people to reach out to that are close to you. But now since we can all get very close now digitally, I encourage people to reach out to other school districts, seeing what they're doing, if you have a question, things like that. And if you have some specific situations you're trying to wrap your head around, email us and call us. We can talk you through those things more specifically. It's always hard to talk really specifically about situations through this kind of forum. But if we were, if you called Michele and she's looking through what you've done, that would be a lot easier for her to address your situation. But yes, thank you. The intent is to serve our students the best way we possibly can.
Yes, and I don't know, I know I want to respect people's time too, and I think Erika's still got quite a bit of just kind of, again, I think it's helpful information to point to those resources. And then I don't know, Michele, if maybe we want to save all the chat and comb through for those questions, and then we can produce some format of answering some of those, maybe not like the student specific questions, but the general questions that are coming through. And then the student specific ones, definitely, like Todd said, reaching out to Michele and trying to get those answers.
Yeah, if you can, we'll finish up here at 3:30. We can't extend our time, but if you would go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. We won't answer them all on this, but Sara, Erika, and I can go through them over the weekend. We're not going to get it out tonight probably, but hopefully early next week. And I'll respond with a link to this PowerPoint and the recorded session as well as try to answer the questions that you put in the chat box in the next few minutes.
And we'll hopefully try to answer all your questions we don't know the answer to. We've also been reaching out to other states and other national organizations to get some answers also. But since all states are like in the same position, we've all been sharing resources and information with each other. So any questions that we don't really know a good answer to, we'll do our best to reach out to our counterparts and figure that out.
Okay, so let me just very quickly then, in addition to the special education part of the OSDE website, I would direct your attention to what is now labeled as counseling. I'll say we were going through a website shift and then COVID-19 hit. So think of counseling as student support, because it's actually all of the documentation from the student support office. And so that's going to be some of your times to shine. So there's guidance on there about providing SEL lessons, how to talk to students about COVID-19. There's a tools for parents who are now teachers page. So all of that is on counseling. And again, you've got additional skills besides evaluation that you can be engaging right now, serving as consultants to parents, as consultants to teachers, as consultants to families, and really focusing on even academically collecting data. So go back to your NASP practice model and think, what are all of these other skills that I can also be engaging in that I am supporting students? And by the way, those are also things that could go on a MEGS that says we aren't able to complete the evaluation, but we're supporting students through these ways. So I would encourage you to look at those, and a ton more coming out daily. So mark the counseling site, and then know, of course, about the distance learning, which is everything that's coming out of the curriculum department. You can dive into those and help serve, again, as consultants to teachers for how to make adaptations to some of those recommendations, and packets for students that need those kinds of recommendations. So another place to go. Go ahead, Sarah. I think we're almost out of time. The other place I would direct you all to go, another great set of communities, are the echoes that are going on right now. And so the link is here. The TeleSped echo, the second one listed, is going to be particularly beneficial because it's a forum similar to this, where we're getting perspectives from superintendents, special education directors, Andrea Kunkel, school psychs, and they are all coming together to work through some of these issues. There's also TeleEd, which talks about some more general education issues, and TeleEdge coming out of the OSDE. There's 3 times a week just an Oklahoma update on COVID-19. It's actually from the medical community. So any of those echoes would be a great place to gain additional information as well. I think both Todd and Sarah said, go to NASP. They have developed an entire COVID-19 resource center. You do not have to be a school psychologist to benefit from what NASP is putting out, because the organization's mission is to support not just our profession, but families, students, and schools. So I would recommend that you go there and bookmark that page. They're putting out great things daily. They've got 3 webinars that address a lot of the questions that have come across today from our professional organization standpoint. So be sure to look at NASP. And then, of course, OSPA is doing its best. The board has met, I think, twice officially, plus the committees are meeting daily, and they're also trying to provide, it's okay, Sarah, because we're going fast anyway, but they're also trying to provide resources. We're sending out emails. We're in collaboration across departments at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. We're talking with higher ed. So that's another place to get some of those professional practice questions answered. And so I just want you to know that both of those organizations are also working hard and advocating on your behalf with all of these questions. And you should feel free to reach out to the OSPA leadership, to the NASP leadership if we're missing something, if you feel like we're not giving you the information that you need. So that was a super quick rundown of those resources. I'm happy to answer any questions. As I know, Michele has her information up here now, so you can direct additional questions her way, and she is going to do her best to field them. If she doesn't already know the answer, which she probably does, but if she doesn't, she'll be happy to field them. And just know that Sarah and I and and the entire OSPA board are here to support some of those questions. So again, I appreciate the forum and the discussion.
Sara and or Erika, can you guys answer? There's one question I think that probably needs addressed. What do we do, or what would you recommend about seniors that they've started the evaluation process, but we're not going to have access to them once May comes around? They're going to the military or something like that. What do you have a recommendation?
I think that's kind of a tricky one. And I don't know, I'm going to just give my professional opinion and you guys can correct me if you hear anything wrong with it. But I think for those situations where you know the child or student won't be back, I would recommend closing out everything that you can if it's opened, and have all the data that you have, whether it's review of existing data or if you collected any data, so that there's something documented that when they need a copy of their IEP and evaluation, something is official and goes with them to that. So that would be my recommendation. But of course, documenting this wasn't complete, these things still need to be done, there's COVID, all of that. But I think if they're not going to be there, they need that documentation. Todd, do you have something else on that?
I mean, it's a good question. It's confusing. It's the problem. One of the problems is, once they graduate, there's technically no obligation to provide any services or do anything if they graduate. And I don't really want to suggest that we keep them not graduated until we can do an evaluation just for that reason.
And I would say you collected information through a REDS process, so you already have some idea about what people were concerned about or about anticipated needs for a student. And so that can all just still be documented to allow whoever needs it next to know, hey, here's what we were concerned about. Based on the information we did have, here are some things we think the student could benefit from. And I just think that would be good information, for whoever's next, the military or university or whatever they're going to, just know that, again, a best faith effort to advocate for what that student needs based on the data that you have.
Yeah, because remember, I mean, this happens with any person once they transition out of a school setting, then those responsibilities of evaluation go to whatever personal setting they're in next, whether it's they have to seek it out on their own, or the military or universities have evaluation processes. So there are other people who can complete those evaluations. I think it's just important to have documented the need for that evaluation.
Krista just had a good point. She said, be sure and send the data that we have with them.
Yes.
It doesn't do us any good to hang on to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to finish up. Again, as soon as we come up with a comprehensive, I'm sure, question and answer doc, we will get that out to you guys sometime next week. And again, if you have questions, go ahead and send them to me. Brittany, I understand I will forward OSPA questions definitely to Sara and Erika and the group there to answer those. But for things like timeline questions and things like that need an OSD response, that's kind of why they were filtered through me first. So just try to answer that question. And then they can forward it to who they need to get answered to. So anyway, thank you guys for joining us. Gary, you can stop the recording, and we look forward to have a great week next week, and enjoy your Friday afternoon and your weekend. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.